It's a joy to be able to give you this program based on one of the most amazing prophecies found throughout the whole Bible. It is the prophecy of Daniel. We are today at a set here in Orlando, Florida at the Holy Land Experience. Behind me is a magnificent model of the Second Temple, as it was in the days of Jesus. With this tremendous backdrop, which I encourage you and your family to come and visit in Orlando the next time you have a vacation. It's a wonderful opportunity to help your children and yourself to understand even more deeply the things in the Bible, those stories, especially concerning Jerusalem and the Temple Mount and all the biblical stories of both the Old and New Testament. The prophecy of Daniel is the vision of the 70 weeks. In this prophecy, Daniel was given a vision that is remarkable for the precision by which God allowed him to understand literally to the very day when Jesus Christ would be cut off and ultimately crucified. We know this because that prophecy was so precise that when we do the calculation, as we will do in this program, I believe you will be as thrilled and as fascinated as I am. This prophecy is a prophecy that tells us the beginning point and the end point to the very day, a period of 483 biblical years. What am I talking about? Well, first, if we want to understand Bible prophecy in precision, we must understand a basic principle. What was the length of the biblical prophetic year? What am I talking about? Well, if you were back in the days of Abraham or in the days of King David, and you said, meet me here in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount 1 year from today, when would they expect to find you? They would expect to find you not 365 and a quarter days as we count in our modern calendar, but rather they would calculate a biblical prophetic year as being precisely 360 days. How do we know this? Well, for example, let me show you that in the book of Genesis that recounts Noah's flood, we're told that the waters were on the face of the earth in the fullness for exactly 150 days. But the Bible tells us that that period was from the 17th day of the second month to the 17th day of the seventh month. 5 months. 5 months, yet it was precisely 150 days. That tells us that the days were composed of a year of 360 days, each month, 12 months to the year, having precisely 30 days. We find that Isaac Newton, one of the greatest Bible scholars of ancient history, and one man who spent his time studying chronology, perhaps more than any human being has before or since, and he was one of the greatest mathematicians in history. In his book on the chronology of the Bible and observations on Daniel and Revelation, he tells us that the ancient year of the Sumerians, the Egyptians, and the Jews, and the Babylonians was of 360 days. This is also confirmed in both Daniel and Revelation because we're told that the 3.5-year period of the Great Tribulation, that one half of that 7-year tribulation period, the last half is 3.5 years. And yet the Bible, speaking of exactly the same period, tells us it's precisely 1,260 days. What that means is Daniel and Revelation are both using a biblical prophetic year of 360 days to the year. Why is this important? Because it will show you how precise God was when he laid out this prophecy. Do you know that the early Jews living before Jesus was born did not expect the Messiah at any time before Jesus was born? However, when Jesus was born, we remember the story of the wise men, and the wise men came up to see the king, King Herod. And what did they ask? Where is he that is born King of the Jews? And the answer was given, that the King of the Jews would be found in Bethlehem. Why did the king and the various scribes around him not ask the question, what are you talking about? Why? Because they understood Daniel's prophecy, that the Messiah was to appear at exactly that time. Do you know that even Jewish commentaries on Daniel today, speaking of the coming of the Messiah, say the great mystery is why the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and yet the Messiah, in their mind, had not yet come. What are they referring to? They understood that the prophet, especially Daniel, had clearly stated that the Messiah would be born at the beginning of what we call the first century, the first Christian century, the very time when Jesus was in fact born. We find the calculation begins with a commencement period. In the Bible, in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, Daniel has been troubled. He knows that God had told him clearly through the words of Jeremiah the prophet, who was a contemporary of Daniel, who was living in Jerusalem. Jeremiah in chapter 25:11 had told everyone, including Daniel, that the period of their captivity of the Jewish captives in Babylon was 70 years precisely. He knew it was coming to an end. Therefore, in Daniel 9, he says, I knew, having read Jeremiah, that the 70 years were coming to an end. And he prayed that God would give him a further revelation. And here's what God said: 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression and to make an end for sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Notice this. When we look at Daniel's prophecy, he tells us that the 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. This is verse 24. And upon thy holy city. And here are the things we're told that God has anointed Daniel, that this prophecy is about Daniel's holy city, Jerusalem, and Daniel's people. This is not about the Gentiles. It is concerning the Jews. And here he goes on to say what is going to happen at the conclusion of the 70 weeks. Now, they used the idea of a week of years being a period of 7 years just as commonly as you and I would use the word decade. We think in terms of 10 years at a time. They thought in terms of 7 years at a time. And anyone who reads the Bible carefully can see that again and again throughout the Bible, things are 7 days, 7 trumpets, 7 seal judgments. 7 is a number that appears again and again, and throughout the Jewish understanding of time. Not only did they divide the week into 7 days, but they divided their time into a period of a heptad, or a period of 7 years at a time, which they called a week of years. Daniel was told a period of 70 weeks of years will take place. 70 times 7, 490 biblical prophetic years of 360 days. That is the whole duration of the vision. What's going to happen at the end of it? It's going to finish the transgression. This is when Jesus Christ comes. It's going to make an end of sins. It's going to make a reconciliation for iniquity. And it's going to bring in everlasting righteousness. It will seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. What God is saying through Daniel's words is that this period of 77 is going to be a period which commences at a definite point in history, known to everyone as much as you and I know when America became a nation. It was a well-publicized date. He goes on to tell the end of that period will be the coming of Jesus Christ, when he makes an end of sins and he anoints the most holy. And we'll come back to that. Here we have the details. Verse 25, the calculation. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, that's the beginning, until the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Now this is a little complicated, but what Daniel has done, as God has instructed him, is he's divided the period of 490 years into 2 large parts. One very large and one quite small, in fact. The first part is composed of 7 weeks of years. 7 times 7, 49 years. That is when, in fact, Jerusalem was rebuilt by the Jews coming back from Babylon. Next, he was told there would be a period of 62 weeks of years. 62 times 7, a period of 434 years. We add the 2 together, and we end up with 69 weeks of years which begins